In war-torn Novograd, a loyal dog waits tirelessly at an old gas station. As bombs fall and sirens wail, Olivia, a devoted nurse, risks everything to care for this symbol of hope. But when forced evacuation arrives, she faces an impossible choice. The fates of the dog and the town converge in a moment of chaos and redemption. What Olivia uncovers will change everything forever. Will hope survive in a world torn apart?
The small town of Novograd had seen better days. Once a bustling community, known for its charming cafes and picturesque streets, it now bore the scars of a conflict that had dragged on for far too long. The sound of distant artillery occasionally punctuated the eerie silence that had settled over the town. Yet, amid the boarded-up shops and sandbag barricades, life persisted. Children still played in hidden corners, and the elderly gathered to share meager rations and whispered hopes of peace. At the edge of town stood an old gas station, its rusted pumps a reminder of more prosperous times. The faded sign above the entrance creaked in the wind, barely legible after years of neglect. It was here, in this forgotten corner of Novograd, that a peculiar sight had become a daily occurrence. A medium-sized dog, his coat a patchwork of brown and white, sat patiently by the station's entrance, his eyes fixed on the road leading into town. The locals had noticed the dog's presence weeks ago. At first, they assumed he belonged to someone nearby, perhaps a family that had fled the advancing conflict. But as days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, it became clear that this canine sentinel had no intention of leaving his post. Some of the townspeople had tried to coax him away with offers of food or shelter, but the dog remained steadfast, accepting morsels only to return to his vigil. As the war crept ever closer to Novograd, the dog's unwavering loyalty became a topic of conversation among the residents. Children would stop by on their way to school, patting his head and sharing their meager breakfasts. The elderly would sit near him, finding comfort in his quiet companionship. In a town gripped by uncertainty, the dog at the gas station became an unlikely symbol of constancy. A reminder that even in the darkest times, some bonds remain unbroken. Olivia Petrov had always been drawn to healing. Even as a child, she'd bandage her dolls and nurse injured birds back to health. Now, at 52, her salt and pepper hair pulled back in a neat bun, she moved through the makeshift hospital with quiet efficiency. The war had transformed the town's community center into a place of both hope and despair. Olivia's days were filled with the sounds of muffled sobs, hushed prayers, and the occasional distant explosion. Despite the chaos that surrounded her, Olivia found moments of peace in her daily routine. Every morning, she would walk the 3 kilometers from her small apartment to the hospital, using this time to steel herself for the challenges ahead. It was on one of these walks that she first noticed the dog at the gas station. At first, she barely registered his presence, her mind preoccupied with supply shortages and the influx of new patients. But as days passed, Olivia found herself looking forward to seeing the loyal canine. She began to leave a few minutes earlier each morning, taking a small detour to the gas station. The dog would wag his tail at her approach, his eyes lighting up with a warmth that seemed out of place in their war-torn surroundings. Olivia started bringing small scraps of food, a piece of stale bread, a bit of cheese, offerings that the dog accepted with gentle gratitude. One particularly gloomy morning, as the sound of artillery seemed closer than ever, Olivia found herself lingering at the gas station. She knelt beside the dog, her hand gently stroking his matted fur. "What's your story, my friend?" she murmured, more to herself than to the canine companion. The dog leaned into her touch, and for a moment, the weight of the war seemed to lift from Olivia's shoulders. In that quiet exchange, a bond began to form, one that would soon be tested by the harsh realities of their embattled world. Novograd had once been a jewel of the region, known for its vibrant markets and the ancient clock tower that stood at its center. Now, the markets were sparse, with only a handful of vendors brave enough to set up shop. The clock tower, miraculously untouched by the shelling, still chimed every hour, a defiant reminder of normalcy in abnormal times. Residents scurried through the streets, eyes darting nervously to the sky, their movements quick and purposeful. The war had crept closer over the past months, transforming the town in subtle yet profound ways. Sandbags lined the entrances of important buildings. Windows were taped to prevent shattering from nearby explosions, and air raid shelters had been hastily constructed in basements across the city. The local government struggled to maintain essential services, with frequent power outages and water shortages testing the resilience of Novograd's inhabitants. Despite the hardships, a sense of community persevered. Neighbors looked out for one another, sharing what little they had. The old bakery, running on reduced hours, still filled the air with the comforting aroma of fresh bread every morning. Children, though fewer in number, still attended makeshift classes in the basement of the library, their laughter a stark contrast to the somber mood that hung over the town. At night, families huddled around radios, hungry for news and hopeful for signs of peace. Amidst this backdrop of cautious perseverance, the story of the loyal dog at the gas station began to spread. It started as whispers among the elderly who frequented the park nearby, then made its way to the school children who passed the station on their way to classes. Soon, the dog became a symbol of steadfast hope for many in Novograd. Some even started to make small pilgrimages to the gas station, leaving offerings of food and water for the canine sentinel, finding in his unwavering presence a mirror of their own determination to endure. As dawn broke over Novograd, the loyal dog at the gas station stirred from his sleep. His routine, now as predictable as the chiming of the town's clock tower, began anew. He stretched, shook off the morning dew, and took up his position near the rusted pumps. His eyes, though tired, remained alert, scanning the road that led into town. Occasionally, his ears would perk up at a distant sound, hope flickering briefly before settling back into patient waiting. Throughout the day, a steady stream of townspeople would pass by, each interaction a testament to the impact the dog had made on the community. Old Mr. Kozlov, hobbling on his cane, would stop to share a bit of his rationed sausage. "Still waiting, eh?" he'd mutter, a mix of admiration and sadness in his voice. A group of children, on their way to their basement classroom, would pause to pat his head and whisper encouragements. "Maybe today's the day," they'd say, their young voices full of optimism that the dog's long wait would end. As the sun reached its zenith, the dog's vigilance never wavered. He'd accept the offerings of food and water gratefully, but never strayed far from his post. Even when the air raid sirens wailed, sending the townspeople scurrying for shelter, the dog remained, his steadfast presence a strange comfort to those who glanced back as they sought safety. In those moments of crisis, he seemed to embody the resilience of Novograd itself, battered but unbroken. As evening approached, Olivia would make her way back from the hospital, her steps heavy with the day's burdens. She'd pause at the gas station, kneeling beside the dog. Another day, my friend," she'd say softly, running her hand through his fur. In these quiet moments, both found solace. Olivia in the simple, unconditional companionship, and the dog in the gentle touch that momentarily eased his endless weight. As darkness fell, the dog would curl up to sleep, ready to begin his vigil anew with the coming dawn. Olivia's decision to care for the dog was not made lightly. She knew the risks of attachments in wartime, had seen too many hearts broken by loss. Yet, as she watched the dog's health slowly decline, his coat losing luster and his ribs becoming more pronounced, she couldn't stand idly by. One evening, after a particularly grueling shift at the hospital, Olivia made a detour to the small veterinary clinic that still operated on reduced hours. Dr. Yakov, an old friend, listened patiently as Olivia described the dog's condition. "Olivia," he sighed, "you know how scarce supplies are. Every bit of medicine is needed for the townspeople." But seeing the determination in her eyes, he relented, providing her with some basic medications and advice. As Olivia left the clinic, a small bag of supplies in hand, she felt a mix of guilt and resolve. She knew she was using resources that could be saved for humans, but in her heart, she believed that preserving this symbol of loyalty and hope was crucial for the town's morale. Caring for the dog proved to be more challenging than Olivia had anticipated. The nightly curfew meant she had to sneak out in the early hours before her shift, risking reprimand or worse if caught. She began to leave earlier each morning, her medical bag now containing not only supplies for her human patients, but also food, water, and medicine for her canine charge. The dog, whom she had started calling Bruce, seemed to sense her sacrifice. His eyes filled with gratitude as she tended to him. As weeks passed, Olivia's secret mission became a source of purpose beyond her hospital duties. She meticulously tracked Bruce's health, celebrating small victories like a slight weight gain or a patch of newly grown fur. But with each passing day, the sound of artillery grew closer, and the strain of her double duty began to show. Dark circles formed under her eyes, and her colleagues noticed her distraction. Olivia knew she was walking a dangerous line, but every time she saw Bruce's tail wag at her approach, she felt a renewed sense of determination. In a world torn apart by conflict, this small act of kindness felt like a vital rebellion against the encroaching darkness. As Olivia tended to Bruce one quiet morning, her gentle touch seemed to stir something in him. His eyes, usually fixed on the road, turned to her with a depth of emotion that caught her off guard. In that moment, she could almost see flashes of his past life, a life before the war, before the endless waiting. She imagined him as a younger dog, full of energy and joy, running through sun-dappled fields with a family that loved him deeply. In her mind's eye, Olivia saw a modest house on the outskirts of town, its small garden bursting with colorful flowers. She could almost hear the laughter of children as they played with Bruce, tossing a worn tennis ball that he faithfully retrieved time and again. There was a man, his face kind but tired from a long day's work, who would scratch Bruce behind the ears as he settled in for the evening. And a woman, her hands gentle as she brushed Bruce's coat, humming softly as the sun set behind the distant hills. These visions, though imagined, felt so real that Olivia found herself blinking back tears. She wondered about the circumstances that had led to Bruce's current situation. Had his family been forced to flee suddenly, unable to take him along? Or had they left him at the gas station, promising to return but never making it back? The possibilities were as numerous as they were heartbreaking. each scenario a reflection of the countless tragedies the war had inflicted on both humans and animals alike. As the vision faded, Olivia found herself back in the present, her hand still resting on Bruce's fur. The loyal dog leaned into her touch, as if seeking comfort from memories that might have been stirred in him as well. Olivia made a silent promise then, not just to Bruce, but to the unknown family he represented. She would care for him, keep him safe, and hold on to hope just as fiercely as he did. In doing so, she felt she was honoring not just this one dog's loyalty, but the enduring spirit of all those who waited and hoped in the face of war's cruel uncertainties. Word of Olivia's secret mission spread through Novograd like wildfire. At first, there were whispers of disapproval. How could anyone justify using precious resources on a dog when people were suffering? But as more townspeople witnessed Bruce's unwavering loyalty and Olivia's dedication, attitudes began to shift. The dog at the gas station was no longer just a curiosity. He had become a symbol of hope and resilience for a town battered by war. Soon, a small but determined group of supporters emerged. Mrs. Petrova, the owner of the local bakery, began setting aside a small portion of bread each day. "It's not much," she'd say, pressing the wrapped bundle into Olivia's hands. "But we all need something to believe in." Mr. Ivanov, the retired schoolteacher, took it upon himself to visit Bruce in the afternoons, reading aloud from old books as the dog listened attentively, his tail wagging gently. Children started leaving small trinkets, colorful pebbles, handmade bracelets, even precious marbles, around Bruce's spot at the gas station. "For luck," they'd whisper, their young faces a mixture of hope and determination. The elderly, who had seen wars come and go, would sit near Bruce in the evenings, finding comfort in his steady presence. They'd share stories of their own lost pets, of homecomings long overdue, their weathered voices carrying both sorrow and hope. As the community rallied around Bruce, Olivia felt a renewed sense of purpose. What had started as her solitary mission had blossomed into a collective effort of kindness. In Bruce's unwavering vigil, the people of Novograd found a mirror for their own resilience. Each act of care for the loyal dog became an act of defiance against the despair that threatened to engulf them. In these small gestures of compassion, the town rediscovered its humanity, a precious commodity in a world torn by conflict. As weeks turned into months, the toll of Bruce's long vigil became increasingly apparent. His once lustrous coat had become matted and dull, hanging loosely over a frame that had grown too thin. Olivia noticed with growing concern the way he limped slightly when he moved, and how his breathing seemed more labored with each passing day. The harsh realities of life on the streets, exacerbated by the privations of wartime, were etched into every line of his body. Olivia's own appearance mirrored Bruce's decline. Dark circles had taken up permanent residence under her eyes, and her scrubs hung loosely on her frame. The strain of her double duty, tending to the wounded at the hospital and caring for Bruce, was taking its toll. Yet she persevered, driven by a sense of purpose that transcended her own discomfort. In Bruce's unwavering loyalty, she found the strength to face each day's challenges. The parallels between Bruce's condition and the state of Novograd were not lost on the townspeople. Like the loyal dog, their city bore the scars of prolonged hardship. Buildings that had once stood proud now slouched, their facades pockmarked by shrapnel. The streets, once bustling with life, were now eerily quiet, broken only by the occasional sound of distant artillery. Shops that had weathered generations stood empty, their windows dark and shuttered. Yet, just as Bruce continued his vigil despite his deteriorating health, Novograd clung to life with stubborn determination. Children still played in bombed-out playgrounds, their laughter a defiant melody against the backdrop of war. The town's clock tower, though scarred by near misses, still chimed every hour, its steady rhythm a reminder of the persistence of time and hope. In Bruce's quiet strength, the people of Novograd found a reflection of their own resilience, a silent encouragement to endure, to wait, to hope for better days ahead. The day Olivia had been dreading finally arrived. The hospital's supplies, already stretched thin, had reached a critical low. As she stood in the nearly empty storage room, the weight of her dual responsibilities crashed down upon her. Every bandage, every dose of antibiotics she used for Bruce was one less available for her human patients. The ethical dilemma that she had managed to push to the back of her mind now stood front and center, demanding to be addressed. That evening, as she made her way to the gas station, her medical bag felt heavier than ever. Bruce greeted her with his usual wagging tail, but even this seemed subdued, as if he sensed the conflict raging within her. Olivia knelt beside him, her hand shaking slightly as she began to clean a nasty cut on his paw. "What am I doing, Bruce?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "How can I justify this when there are children in need?" As she worked, voices from the hospital echoed in her mind. The cries of pain, the desperate pleas for help, the quiet sobs of those facing loss. But alongside these, she heard the voices of hope, the townspeople who found solace in Bruce's unwavering vigil, the children who believed that as long as Bruce waited, there was hope for a better tomorrow. In this loyal dog, the town had found a symbol of endurance, a living embodiment of the human spirit's capacity to withstand hardship and maintain faith. Tears streamed down Olivia's face as she finished bandaging Bruce's paw. She had made her decision, though it brought her no peace. She would continue to care for Bruce, but she would also redouble her efforts to secure more supplies for the hospital. In her heart, she believed that the hope Bruce provided was as vital to the town's survival as any medicine. As she stood to leave, Bruce gently licked her hand, a gesture of thanks that felt like absolution. Olivia squared her shoulders and turned towards home, ready to face another day in a world where every choice carried the weight of life and death. The air raid sirens wailed with an urgency that Novograd hadn't heard before. Olivia jolted awake, her heart pounding as she rushed to her window. The Pridden sky was lit up with flares, and the distant rumble of artillery seemed closer than ever. She'd barely had time to grab her medical bag before a loud knock came at her door. "Mandatory evacuation," a voice shouted. "You have 1 hour to gather essentials. Meet at the town square." Chaos erupted in the streets as people scrambled to pack whatever they could carry. Olivia's mind raced. The hospital, her patients, and Bruce. She had to make sure everyone was taken care of. As she hurried towards the hospital, she saw families tearfully leaving their homes, elderly neighbors being helped into trucks, and children clutching beloved toys. The town she had known was disappearing before her eyes. At the hospital, it was controlled chaos. Olivia worked tirelessly with her colleagues to prepare the patients for transport. Every minute felt like an hour as they raced against time. Just as they were loading the last patient into an ambulance, Olivia made a split-second decision. "I'll catch up," she told the head nurse, ignoring the woman's protests. "There's something I need to do first." With the sound of approaching tanks in the distance, Olivia ran towards the gas station. Her lungs burned and her legs ached, but she pushed on. As she rounded the corner, she saw Bruce, still at his post, looking confused and frightened by the commotion.
"Come on, boy,"
She called out, her voice breaking. "It's time to go!" But as she reached for him, Bruce whined and backed away, his eyes fixed on the road he had watched for so long. Olivia felt tears streaming down her face as she realized the impossible choice before her. Force Bruce to leave or stay behind with him, risking everything. As Olivia stood frozen in indecision, the rumble of an approaching vehicle cut through the chaos. Her heart leapt to her throat. Was it the enemy? But as the battered old truck came into view, she saw it was packed with civilians, faces etched with fear and exhaustion. The vehicle screeched to a halt near the gas station, and a middle-aged couple burst out, their eyes wild with desperation. "Boria!" the woman cried out, her voice cracking with emotion. Bruce's ears perked up, his tail beginning to wag furiously. In a flash, he was bounding towards the couple, all signs of illness and fatigue vanishing in an instant. Olivia watched in stunned silence as Bruce, or Boria, as he was apparently called, showered his long-lost family with affectionate licks, his whole body quivering with joy. The man, tears streaming down his weathered face, turned to Olivia. "We've been trying to get back for months," he explained hurriedly, the sound of artillery punctuating his words. "We had to leave him when the first evacuations happened. We promised we'd come back, but the roads were blocked." His voice trailed off as he hugged Bruce tightly. Olivia felt a complex mix of emotions: relief, joy, and a twinge of sadness at the thought of parting with our canine friend. There was no time for long explanations or goodbyes. The man helped his wife and Bruce into the truck, then turned to Olivia. "Come with us," he urged, extending his hand. For a moment, Olivia hesitated, thinking of her duty to the town and her patients. But as another explosion rocked the ground, she realized her mission here was complete. With one last glance at the gas station that had been Bruce's home for so long, she took the man's hand and climbed into the truck. As they sped away from Novograd, Olivia felt Bruce's warm body press against her leg, a silent thank you for her months of care and a promise of new beginnings. Months after the evacuation, Olivia found herself standing once again at the entrance of Novograd. The town, though battered, was slowly coming back to life. The war had ended, leaving scars on the landscape and in the hearts of its people, but also a fierce determination to rebuild. As she walked the familiar streets, memories flooded back, of long nights at the hospital, of the community's resilience, and of a loyal dog who had become a symbol of hope. The old gas station still stood, a silent sentinel to Bruce's long vigil. Olivia approached it, her hand trailing along the rusted pumps. She could almost see Bruce sitting there, his eyes fixed on the horizon. A small smile played on her lips as she remembered the joy of his reunion with his family. In the midst of wars, chaos, that moment of pure happiness had been a precious gift. As she turned to leave, Olivia noticed something that made her heart skip a beat. There, at the base of the gas pump, was a small, makeshift shrine. Photos of pets lost during the war, notes of remembrance, and even a few dog toys had been carefully arranged. At the center was a crudely painted portrait of Bruce, his loyal eyes seeming to watch over the town even now. Olivia knelt down, adding her own memento, the small brush she had used to groom Bruce during those long months. Standing up, Olivia took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past lifting from her shoulders. Bruce's story had spread far beyond Novograd, inspiring others with its message of loyalty, hope, and the enduring power of love. As she walked back towards the rebuilding town, Olivia realized that in caring for Bruce, she had helped keep alive something vital. The belief that even in the darkest times, compassion and dedication could light the way forward. The war had ended, but the legacy of a loyal dog at a gas station would continue to inspire for years to come.